Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist where we are going through the pages of the book titled How to Unlock Your Subconscious Mind Through the Science of Mental Analysis. This book was co-authored between Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne Benedict. It was published in 1921 and it is in the public domain. We are now heading into lesson 2, and that first lesson was about the world of dreams and symbols. It was interesting, the explanation about the visual imagery that we have in our world of dreams and how, depending on which one of our other physical senses are more acute, that we could actually experience them in our world of dreams. What was fascinating and mind-blowing was understanding that 9/10 of our brain capacity is holding an immense library of every little thing that we have seen. So it is amazing. It really is. And so I can relate when I do my tarot sessions, which is part of my channel here. It is no mystery. Tarot is not a mystery. It is the world of symbols and the associations. I have interpreted dreams for people. One thing that I have learned through this is that symbols are also, while there are universal symbols that we all may agree what they mean, like seeing yellow triangle sign, most of us universally have come to understand that that may mean caution ahead or yield as you approach forward. And then there are things that I have learned that because of the way that we have associated our experiences to it, it could have a different meaning. While a dog could be a positive experience for someone else it may be very traumatic. So I would approach anyone that is using a book to interpret their dreams to have an open mind, that may not be etched in stone, to first explore their own world of symbols as they try to understand themselves through dream interpretation. I also keep a dream journal and would encourage anyone to try and venture with that experience. For me, it has allowed me to understand myself a little bit better, and also at the same time to release through the act of writing something down and then just kind of reviewing it, letting go of something that was in a dream state now became a conscious, and then I was able to sit back and contemplate and kind of either make peace with that or explore further. Why did I have this dream? And very interesting what can be revealed, and how also liberating it is for the soul and the mind and the heart. So having said that, I hope that you're liking this book that I brought to the channel. And so get comfortable, get your coffee, get your tea, and depending what time of day, get your wine. And we start off with a poem by Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yet make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet don't act too good nor talk too wise. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. Yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And what is more, you'll be a man, my son. Lesson 2. Your emotional Niagara. Honeymooners, tourists, and passerbys may see Niagara Falls as only a great spectacle. But to the engineer, the scientist, and the man who stops to think, it is a great spectacle. Plus, he sees its mighty avalanche in the terms of power. the power that furnishes light and heat and driving energy for cities hundreds of miles in every direction. A torrent, swift, swirling, and stupendous. Dashing over the precipice, its gigantic force instantly annihilates everything before it. But with its energy harnessed in electricity by the mind of man, it becomes a powerful constructive current. Your own Niagara. Within every individual, there is a seething current of feelings, impulses, instincts, his emotional Niagara. It is primal, elemental, overwhelming. If uncontrolled, it will handicap, cripple, or completely destroy him, according to the type and temperament of the individual. In some types, the emotions are, for the most part, like a wide Mississippi. Such are the unruffled people. In other and very methodical types, the current is apparently measured out with the precision of an irrigation system, while in others, it is a rapid mountain brook with its current never still and never put to any constructive use. If we waste our emotional energy on non-essentials, we are like the brook that babbles and bubbles without doing anything for itself and evaporates, till at the end of its life journey it is nothing but a trickle, financially and otherwise. If for any reason we have little emotional energy and open the head gates only enough to do this little thing and that in methodical routine, our conserving will do but little good. Emotion and success. You have seen men and women who took the same streetcar at the same corner at the same moment every morning for years. This is the conserving type, and it conserves everything from food to feelings. Such a man is never late at the office. He never misses a day. He never leaves 5 minutes early, but he never goes to the top. He lacks emotional energy, that great power which in men corresponds to horsepower and should be called human power. His human power is always under control, chiefly because there's so little of it. He measures it out as a New England grocer measures out sugar, 2 grains at a time. These people run their lives like train schedules and are about as impersonal. At the next desk there is a man not half so faithful, not a tenth so careful. He is late occasionally, has a day off now and then, and instead of doing his work like a machine, slows down some days and races like mad others. But he is the one who gets invited to the social affairs at the boss's house, and when a promotion is being passed around, he is the man who gets it. He is full of human power. Half organized, he can go farther and faster and accomplish more for the heads of that business than the emotionless man. Control your current. But if the emotional man forgets to control his current, if the powerhouse of reason is closed up so often that the force of the Niagara is not transmuted into electricity for running the main plant, his life, he can and will wind up a failure. The most desirable human possession in the world is emotion. Without it, man is colorless, bloodless, lifeless. He can neither experience a great enthusiasm nor kindle it in others. But it must be controlled by his mind, and its power turned into constructive channels if he would be happy and successful. Psychology of emotion. Emotional energy may be likened to an electrical current in other ways. It is sometimes decreased, as when we are asleep. For the most part, we are not made conscious of it because it is expanded as fast as generated, used up in the activities of every day. But there are other times when we are conscious of intense feeling, when something pleasant or unpleasant has happened, which generated, sometimes instantaneously, an excess of this current. Do you repress or express? Whenever this happens, you do one of two things. You cannot turn the current back to nothingness. It is there. It is intensely alive. You either express it or repress it. If you express it, you are immediately relieved. This explains why the types that have the most fiery tempers forgive quickest. They get it out of their systems. It also explains why those that say nothing when angry nurse their grudges. The people who tell you what they think when offended are never pernicious. Those who hide their feelings usually seek revenge later, sometimes long after you have forgotten the incident. They have saved up, stored away their emotion, awaiting an opportunity. Corking your bottles. Keep the cork out of a bottle, which is what the outspoken type is doing, and there is little danger. Put the cork in, and it ferments. Keep the lid off the kettle, and the boiling will do no harm. But keep it on tight, and there will be an explosion in some direction. If the emotion you feel is one which cannot be expressed freely and fully in the way it craves, if for any reason you are compelled to push this violent feeling into the background, you may imagine you have short-circuited it. But mental analysis proves that such is not the case. You have only stored the current. A switching of the current to something else through which it can be fully and freely expanded is the only solution in this case. Cause of emotion. Every emotion is the combustion that ensues when something has happened which set fire to instinct. Each of your instincts is a pile of tinder, laid ready for lighting and handed down to you from remote ancestors. These bundles of tinder catch fire easily. They are always ready to blaze up. Some of them flame out earlier in life. The instinct of assimilation burns in the newborn babe. It is hungry. There is no thought behind its cry for food. Nothing but blind instinct. Other instinctive fires are lighted later on. The sex instinct of adolescence and higher ones as we proceed through life. We become more reasonable as we grow older because reason is given more and more ascendancy as the fires of instinct die down. But all emotions are the temporary flaring up of the instinct fires. The expression, "he got into a heated argument," is not an accidental phrase. Neither is it accidental the way we say, "he is a cold nature." Such people are never as emotional as the ones we call warm natures. If you can imagine for a moment that though you are a human being, you are full of little banked fires called instincts, which are fanned into flame by certain things, you will never again wonder why it is that you become heated literally as well as figuratively when gripped with emotion. Two kinds of emotion. Emotions are of two kinds, pleasurable and painful. When something occurs to arouse an instinct, you do one of two things, as referred to above, repress or express. If you gratify the instinct, the accompanying emotions will be pleasurable. If you thwart it, the accompanying emotion will be painful. Thus, when you become hungry, your instinct of assimilation is active. If when thoroughly aroused, you can sit down to a delicious meal, the emotion is a pleasant one. But if prevented from eating, the emotion generated will be a painful one. Two kinds of instincts. Society, as we all know, is organized against the free and full expression of certain instincts. Laws, rules, and social customs exist for the purpose of regulating the expression of certain primitive ones which have come down to us from such remote ages that they are habitually and easily aroused, and for the rewarding of certain other and higher instincts which are so recent in us that they must needs be constantly encouraged and upheld to be kept growing. Thus we see society praising generosity, an expression of the recent instinct of altruism, and punishing profiteering, which is an expression of the remote and primitive instinct of greed. It rewards the courageous and ostracizes the coward because his cowardice is the expression of the ancient instinct, fear. It teaches the young to emulate the example of the ambitious, the idealistic, the fastidious, though ambition, idealism, and fastidiousness are instincts too. But they are high instincts and make for the good of society as a whole. Society knows this and safeguards itself so far as it is able. By exacting penalties of various kinds according to the destructiveness of the instinct involved in each case, it compels more repression of the lower and additional expression of the higher. This is necessary and right, and will eventually lead to the elimination of the worst and a development of the best in man. What it does to us. But meanwhile, this does not alter the fact that present-day man, possessed as he is of powerful primitive instincts, finds it very difficult to adapt himself to civilization's code. Something is always occurring to strike the match to an instinct, and unless it happens to be one which society favors, he either expresses it, in which case he risks society's penalty, or he suppresses it, in which case he pays a personal penalty in some form, depending upon his own type and the intensity of the urge. Neither of these is desirable. Therefore, it is imperative that the fire of every emotion be permitted to burn out, but that instead of being allowed to destroy, should be put to constructive use. Psychology of sublimation. Suppose there is a bonfire in your backyard. If you throw water on it, it may smolder and break out later. If you allow it to go unchecked, it will endanger not only your own house, but the homes of your neighbors and perhaps the entire community in which you live. There is but one thing to do. You must control that fire and give it something constructive to use its force upon. In your house, there are a number of things you have planned to cook. Bring them out, put them over the blaze, and let it be doing something worthwhile with its heat energy. Then, when it has burned itself out, you have done something constructive instead of destructive. You have hurt no one, accomplished something for the betterment of your own affairs, and perhaps in the doing prepared extra food for the hungry. This would be sublimation. Some types find it very difficult to sublimate, and others do it almost automatically all their lives. Extremely bony people, extreme brunettes, and those with extremely incurving profiles find sublimation most difficult, but are the very ones who need it most, for they are people of intense feelings. When their feelings are destructive, they either wreck things in their expression or repress them so deeply they sometimes wreck the individual himself. These people are the extremists who either bury an emotion completely or defy the universe. You will recall that the individuals with these characteristics either stay entirely away from a thing or go into it with a faithfulness that is unending. Instincts and individuality. The keynote of a man's nature, which we sometimes speak of as his individuality, is largely determined by his predominant instincts. These instincts are outlined in the externals of that individual. Every general kind of inner impulse which is common to the human race has outer gateways through which it travels to reach the world, and which are indicative of the amount and intensity of that particular urge in the individual's makeup. Instincts and emotions. Every individual becomes emotional most quickly and most intensely over the things which concerns his predominant instincts. Thus, it is that the thing which arouses one man to furious anger leaves another unstirred, and still another only mildly resentful. Each is reacting according to the amount and intensity of his pugnacity instinct, a characteristic which shows plainly in his jaw. Look about amongst your acquaintances, and you will see that the references made herein are corroborated in every one of them. Whether man or woman, the one who is constantly quarreling, having it out with people, is an individual with a longer, wider, or more protruding jaw than the average. The most noted American example of this was Theodore Roosevelt. The person who does not become angry until something important or constantly repeated arises has a jaw that is not extreme in any direction, while the one who lets everybody step on him and never shows anger has either a very receding jaw, a very incurving mouth, or fat features. Effect of expressing emotion. The immediate effect of completely expressing an emotion is a feeling of satisfaction. This is true regardless of whether the instinct is destructive or constructive, recent or remote, and also regardless of the type of the individual. But if the instinct is a destructive one and the individual a man predominantly of high instincts, that is, if he's highly evolved, idealistic, or thoroughly civilized, this feeling of satisfaction will soon give way to one of regret, self-criticism, or in extreme cases, remorse. If he is low-grade evolutionally, if he is a man most of whose instincts are primitive and remote, this feeling of satisfaction will last for a long period, and the action, no matter how unsocial, may never be regretted. If you are a regretter. If you are one of those who are constantly making certain kinds of mistakes and constantly being torn with regret for having made them, remember this: you are dominated too often by some primitive instinct. But the great majority of your instincts are high grade, or you would not have the regrets. Such a man can always learn. He can adapt himself, improve himself, and if you have tried, you can overcome your weaknesses. But the remorse you have had, the twinges of conscience you have suffered, are certain proof that you have high grade or in you to a greater extent than the average person. Let this fact sink in. Then make up your mind not to spend any more time blaming, criticizing, despising, or loathing yourself, for these mental attitudes are fatal to work and happiness. You have done enough of that for 100 lifetimes. Hereafter, use all your energy self-confidently. Apply it to the constructive things. From this time on, never waste another moment in remorse, no matter what you have done. When you make mistakes the next time, don't become depressed. You can indulge in a little healthy disgust if you must, but never discouragement. Remind yourself that every person in the world who ever made anything worthwhile made many grave errors and committed many sins. The difference between great minds and the rest of mankind was not that the great ones did not make mistakes, but that they refused to be crushed by them, got up, shook the dust off their minds, and proceeded to make up for it by doing something constructive. You must do the same, or the future will find you more and more unhappy. Unhappiness leads to more sin, wrong, and crime than anything else in the world. But happiness is a powerful aid to goodness. The Businessman's Story. A man came under our observation several years ago whose health had become undermined. Metabolism tests proved that no specific thing was organically wrong, but showed almost every organ functioning subnormally. He had once been a man of means, with a good business, but had lost it several years before. Since that time, he had gradually gone down financially, physically, and mentally, till his friends could scarcely recognize in him the person they had once known. Yet, he had no bad habits. His system was organically strong and mechanically perfect. So far as could be determined, there was nothing to account for his disintegration. His home life had been ideal, and his wife was devotion itself. He loved her dearly and took pleasure in the achievements of their two girls, who were talented musicians. He could shed no light on the matter, either for his physical or for us. He ate well and slept well. But he had lost all interest in living and refrained from committing suicide only out of consideration for his family. An analysis showed that the trouble had started during a period when he began to despise himself for having done what was, to his high sense of honor, a contemplative thing. Thousands of others would have had no more than a momentary regret, if any, but this self-loathing ate its way into his mind till it consumed him. He had been sent as a delegate from his district to a convention, but owing to the illness of one of their daughters, his wife could not accompany him. On the train, he met a very charming woman whom he had known very slightly in his youth, and who had become so successful a businesswoman herself that she also was a delegate to the convention. It happened that they stopped at the same hotel and, entirely without prearrangement, ran into each other constantly during the convention. As each was there alone, they ate most of their meals together, and by the time the convention neared its close, he had become decidedly, though not deeply, attached to her. He was not a talkative man, but during their last day on the train, and in response to an inexplicable impulse in the midst of a champagne supper on the dinner, he told her the details of a highly dramatic but regrettable episode in the girlhood of his wife. Her sin had never been found out, and she had atoned for it by a life of goodness and gentleness. She had confessed it to him fully, and he had not only forgiven her, but forgotten it now these many years. An hour after his arrival home, he would have given $10,000 to have the story back. At first, he lived in the fear that the woman might relate the story. But when her death a month afterward precluded this, his regret at having told her was not lessened. In his own estimation, his conduct had been all the more unpardonable and unforgettable because he was by nature a man of extreme reticence and unusual refinement. His regret became remorse. He could not look at his wife, nor hear her voice on the telephone without being reminded of what he had done. The incident repeated itself in his mind all day and in his dreams all night. He considered himself beneath contempt. He grew to despise himself. He secretly called himself rotten to the core, and as he expressed it, a man without character, devoid of all manhood. This so wore on him that nothing seemed of any importance in comparison. He had always prided himself on his character and now felt he had none. The result was inevitable to one of his sensitive temperament. He soon began to lose his grip on business. This made it increasingly difficult for him to give his wife and daughters the things they desired, and this in turn increased the self-contempt which was causing the trouble. Being a businessman, and a rather ultra-practical one at that, he had never conceived of the idea that his mental condition was in any way responsible for his physical and financial ones. But he at last sought advice. When told that the strange situation could have had none other than a mental foundation, he recalled the sufferings just related. Upon being shown that his remorse, which had become a prolonged, painful emotion, was not only the cause of his disintegration, but the proof that he was by nature a man of the highest impulses, he began to get well, and is today a bigger, better businessman than he was before. The stenographer's story. To be forced to do things calling for extreme development of some instinct which in that individual is underdeveloped causes almost as much emotional stress as the thwarting of overdeveloped instincts. A case clearly illustrating this came to our notice in a western city some years ago. An ambitious young woman had risen to a very responsible position for one of her youth, private secretary to the president of a large importing house. But she became so ill-tempered that her employer finally told her she could have a month in which to redeem herself, at the end of which time she must leave unless her disposition had improved. She was especially chagrined at this, for she had only a few months before been promoted to the position after years of keeping her eye on it as her goal. She adapted herself easily to all the duties save one. The president insisted that the new secretary take his dictation herself. She had done little stenography in her previous position, but was in practice and got out the letters in expert fashion. But after each dictation period, she was so emotional that the merest trifles caused her to cry or scold or laugh hilariously. When she came to us, she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to the suppression of one instinct, and to the demand for another which in her was but little developed. The overdeveloped instinct was that of approbation. She demanded constant praise, and had always received much of it from previous employers. The president was not given to compliments, and no matter how excellent her work, never told her it was so, nor seemed to be aware that she was a remarkably competent secretary. She was also very pretty, and this was the first employer who had not, in some nice, indirect way, taken notice of this fact. In addition to this, he dictated much more rapidly than she had been accustomed to, and though she got every word and punctuated correctly, it was at the cost of intense effort, because she had very little of the instinct of manipulation upon which easy hand work depends. Fat man's emotions. You are well acquainted with the fat man who never loses his temper save when his meals are interfered with. His emotions are painful or pleasurable in accordance with the degree in which his stomach is satisfied. Such a man becomes as enthusiastic over good food as other types do over good music, good books, good ball games, or good business deals. In this man, the instinct of assimilation is paramount. Inertia and indolence. An intellectual and charming woman of 35, who had taught in Columbia for several years, decided to put her knowledge to a wider use and one which would bring her better financial returns. She entered into a partnership with another college woman, and they were very successful. The other woman was full of common sense and practicality, as well as learning. She was moreover a bundle of energy. She loved the work and never tired of it, retiring at 1 in the morning and arising at 6 more refreshed than the other, who usually retired several hours earlier. Though their work was but a few hours in duration, it began at 8 o'clock each morning. The first woman was always late. She could not bring herself to get out of bed, and must take a warm bath in which she lay relaxed for 20 minutes before bringing herself to dress, and became very angry if warned to hasten. She finally returned to the teaching where her working hours were in the middle of the day. When relating the experience after studying mental analysis, she said, I used to become so furious with my partner when she urged me to get up early, hasten through my bath, or sit up after 10 o'clock that I was ill afterward. I had never been compelled to hurry or rise earlier than 8, and my half-hour of relaxation in the bath was as much as part of my day's schedule as meals, and much more necessary to my peace of mind. I blamed myself for losing my temper, especially as she was right and our success depended upon my being prompt, but that didn't help matters. I know why now. The instinct of inertia is overdeveloped in me. I can work long and hard once I am up and out, but I demand frequent periods of complete relaxation, lots of sleep, and to begin the day with that feeling of utter comfort which nothing but a warm bath gives. The wife's story. A wife found that she was losing her husband because of her frequent emotional explosions. She made all manner of sacrifices for him, loved him devotedly, and permitted him to impose on her in numberless ways. But when he dropped cigar ash on the carpet, left his newspapers strewn over things, threw his towels in a wad on the bathroom floor, or failed to hang up his clothes, she flew into a rage. She could not explain it. That the emotion was out of all proportion to the importance of the thing itself, she well knew. What she did not know was that the home-keeping instinct, which man shares with all birds, beavers, and nest-building creatures, was overdeveloped in her. Her one desire in life was to keep her home nest in apple pie order. She had married a man who had so little of this instinct that her ill temper on these occasions seemed to him nothing short of insanity. She gradually learned to use that emotional current to tidy up the house that much sooner instead of expanding it on her husband. The mother's story. What shall I do about my boy? A mother said. I try so hard to please him. I cook only the food he likes. I wait upon him and adapt myself and the household to his wishes, but he seems to hate me. The boy admitted all this and his shame at the treatment he gave his mother, but said she unknowingly did one thing which so irritated him that he was actually growing to hate her. She is always afraid of the future for me and for herself. She's afraid we may get ill, afraid she is getting a cold, afraid that it's going to storm, afraid that something will happen to one or both of us. Now I'm afraid too, but I'm trying to keep my fear to myself, to forget it and to outgrow it. But she waves it in front of me all the time and I can't forget. I'm not naturally self-confident. I suppose I get this fear attitude from her. I am sorry she suffers from it, for I suffer too. But her insistence on holding every kind of catastrophe before my imagination enrages me more and more. The mother, when told what ailed her son, was completely taken back. She had only done it for his good, to warn him and induce him to be prepared for the exigencies of life. A little lesson on how to cure worry changed her and the son and the household in a month's time. Higher emotions. But not all emotions are inimical ones. Those of love, patriotism, and religion show how an emotion can stimulate and purify the personality. Sympathy, forgiveness, generosity, and all forms of humanitarianism are good emotions which lift us far out of our small selves and give us the joy of being all human for hours or days at a time. Every kind word, every courageous deed, every act of voluntary self-sacrifice is full of emotion. Every pioneer, every trailblazer in any line of endeavor goes on in the face of difficulties which seem overwhelming to other men, because he is sustained by an emotion they do not feel. The mother gives of herself, her love, service, toil, and life itself, all for the emotion of mother love. The father works long hours at uncongenial tasks, not actually for the boss, but for the wife and the babies at home. Knowing yourself better. The first step in conquering destructive emotions and encouraging constructive ones is to study yourself. Begin to think of yourself as you are and as you know you are, without whimpers or pretenses. But don't let anything in your nature cause you to give up. Look it square in the eye, and half the trouble is over. We handicap ourselves by putting on the blinder of self-evasion. We refuse to be frank with ourselves. We subconsciously know we are full of faults, but we exaggerate some and ignore others. Some of the emotions you possess could, if capitalized, make you a real success in life. But you have not thought of emotion as having any such power. The world has not recognized it until very recently. History and biography dwell on the less significant elements of its great men and women, forgetting or leaving to the poets the emotional qualities which are at the foundation of every famous name. Don't be supersensitive. The opposite extreme are those who imagine emotionalism alone is something to be proud of. Such people pride themselves on their sensitiveness, their high-strung natures, forgetting that only as we direct our emotions into worthwhile channels for accomplishment, for the good of ourselves and our fellows, can strong emotions become an asset. Every organism, to live, must be sensitive to the stimuli in its environment. But if it is too sensitive, it will forever be in the business of dressing its wounds and have time for little else. Supersensitive people are like the little flowers called sensitive plants, which curl up at the merest touch. They are always looking at their feelings with a microscope. Others are just as emotional but spend their feelings outward and upward like a sunflower that is so enthusiastic about the sun it turns its face from east to west each day to keep looking at it. Use your emotions. Your character is the result of your conduct. Your conduct is the outward expression of your inner emotions. If you desire a strong and beautiful character, you must learn to use your emotions toward building the things you want to come true in your life. Though it is not an easy thing to believe, it is nevertheless true that we can apply our emotions to good ends. We can turn their current into positive channels where it will, like the torrent of Niagara, furnish power for doing many big things we cannot do by reason alone. Whenever you have a destructive emotion, don't swallow it and try to forget it. Don't hate or love a thing, desire to do or crave not to do a thing, and sit still. Get up while the mood is on and do something you have been neglecting. One of the ablest men I have ever known told me he had mastered 3 languages by carrying a little grammar in his pocket and studying it while waiting for his wife in the hall, on the street corner, or wherever he had an engagement to meet her. The first 5 years we were married, I, who am a naturally prompt person myself, was so incensed at her unvarying tardiness, it threatened to wreck our marriage. She could never understand my ravings. Each time she felt she had been unavoidably detained. I was ill sometimes for days after one of these explosions. When I realized I could never change her, I hit upon this idea of improving the time. This was my wife's one serious fault. We have been ideally happy for 30 years since, in which time I have not only learned these new languages, but read and digested much of the world's best literature. This is but one of thousands of possible ways in which an emotion and a period of precious time, which would otherwise be used to tear down, can be made to build up. Choose your emotions. Just as surely as you can use your emotions after they are aroused, you can prevent the wrong ones being aroused most of the time by learning, as you will in the last lesson of this course, how to gain conscious control of the attitudes which bring forth your habitual emotions. It is these habitual explosions that endanger our happiness. They can be made constructive instead of destructive by changing our predominant mental attitudes from negative to positive, an accomplishment perfectly possible to any person of average intelligence. And this concludes Lesson 2 of How to Unlock Your Subconscious Mind Through the Science of Mental Analysis. All right, I'll meet you at the next video for Lesson 3.